Hello? I never saw it coming. I always thought I knew my wife, knew her. We had this perfect little life, or so I thought. It all started so innocently. We were the kind of couple everyone admired, you know? College sweethearts, married young, and we built a life together, stability, routine, everything that made us seem normal. Maybe that was the problem. We had everything, so it never crossed my mind that something was missing, that something was wrong. Her name was Lisa. Gorgeous, smart, funny in the way that she always had this sarcastic humor, a laugh that filled up the whole room. She could make anyone feel at ease, even me, a guy who had always been a little guarded. We met when we were 19, both freshmen at the same university. I was a shy guy, unsure of myself, but she had this energy, this magnetism. She was the kind of girl you couldn't help but gravitate toward. It didn't take long before we were inseparable. By the time we graduated, we were already living together. I wasn't thinking about forever back then. I was thinking about now. But we both just fit together, so why not? We had our fair share of ups and downs, of course. Life isn't perfect, and neither are people. But I thought we were in it for the long haul. We married when we were 25, right after she landed a job in the city. I had a steady job in marketing, and she was doing some PR work. Things were falling into place. We were happy. Or at least I thought we were. Our first child came about 3 years later. A son. We named him Jake. He was everything to both of us. The way Lisa doted on him, the way her face would light up when she looked at him, it made everything feel real, like we were building something solid. But I didn't know what was brewing beneath the surface. I can look back now and see the cracks that were always there, if only I'd known how to see them. Little things at first. Lisa would get quieter sometimes. Or she'd go out with her friends more often, not that I ever thought much about it. After all, we were both adults, right? She needed her space, just like I did. But the first real red flag I should have noticed came the night of Jake's first birthday. The party was at our house, a small get-together with family and a few close friends. I didn't think it would be anything special, just cake, a few laughs, the usual. But Lisa, she'd been on edge all day. Snappy. Detached. At some point, when everyone was busy admiring Jake's little outfit and the piles of presents, Lisa slipped away. I didn't notice at first, too caught up in the celebration. When I did look for her, I found her outside on the porch, talking to James, one of our closest friends. He had been a part of our lives for years, him and his wife, Claire. James was the kind of guy who always had a way with words, smooth, charming. The kind of guy who could make you feel like the most important person in the room. At first, I never really thought much of his attention toward Lisa. I trusted her. I should have known better. She was tipsy, maybe more than I realized. She'd been drinking, but I didn't think much of it. Everybody had. But what I did notice was how her eyes lingered on James. How they exchanged a look. A knowing look. My gut twisted, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Later that night, when everyone was leaving, I saw Lisa slipping James a text before he drove off. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it kept eating at me. The next few days were strange. She was distant again. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It took a few weeks before I pieced it all together. The truth came crashing down one night, like a wave I couldn't outrun. I was home late, working on some marketing project, and Lisa had gone out again with some friends. I was exhausted, but something felt wrong. I went through her phone, not because I suspected anything at first, but because I just needed to know why everything felt different. And there it was. A message from James. A picture. A very inappropriate picture. And then, a string of texts I couldn't ignore. I can't wait to see you tonight, I miss you, you were incredible. It was all there, right in front of me, a betrayal that left me breathless. My stomach churned, my hands shaking as I read it over and over, trying to convince myself that it was some sick joke. But it wasn't. I confronted her the next day. Her reaction, her lack of reaction, was the worst part. She didn't deny it. She didn't try to apologize. It was as if she knew I'd find out, as if she'd been waiting for me to confront her. She didn't even look ashamed. "You were busy, Mike," she said. "You didn't see me. James did. It's funny, you know, how one sentence can change everything." I didn't want to believe it at first. I couldn't. But I demanded the truth. And so she told me. Not only had she been cheating on me for months with James, but there was something else, something worse. Jake. Jake wasn't my son. That was the moment my world shattered. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, was a lie. I couldn't breathe. I was furious. But not just angry, something deeper. Violent. I couldn't control it. I grabbed her by the shoulders and shoved her into the wall, something I never thought I would do. I just wanted to make her feel the weight of the destruction she'd caused. "You're a liar!" I spat. Everything was a lie. I wish I could say I left right then and there. That I had the strength to walk away. But I didn't. I was still in shock. In some twisted way, I thought maybe we could fix it. But deep down, I knew I'd never forgive her. Not for what she did. Not for what she took from me. I wasn't the same person anymore. And neither was she. The next few days felt like a blur. The house was suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. I couldn't look at Lisa without feeling sick to my stomach, but I also couldn't look away. I felt trapped in my own mind, torn between rage and the painful realization that my entire life had been a lie. Lisa didn't leave. She didn't even ask to leave. There was no fight over the house, no pleading, just her sitting there, acting like everything would somehow work itself out. But I couldn't even look at her without wanting to snap. I didn't know what to do with myself. My body felt like it was vibrating with anger, my hands shaking constantly. The only time I felt any relief was when I could leave the house, work, errands, anything that got me away from her. But every time I returned, she was there, waiting. Silent. Almost like she was expecting me to come to her. I didn't. I didn't know what to do about Jake either. He was my son, my little boy. Or at least I thought he was. He looked like me, acted like me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't mine. I didn't even want to be around him, because all I could see was that lie staring back at me. Lisa kept trying to act like everything was fine, like we could work it out. She apologized, constantly. But those apologies meant nothing. They were empty. "I was confused," she said. "I didn't know what I was doing." But the truth was, she knew exactly what she was doing. She had been spending time with James, my best friend, behind my back. James. I couldn't even look at him without feeling an overwhelming urge to hurt him. How could he do that to me? How could he betray me like that? We had been through so much together. He was at our wedding. He'd been there for Jake's birth. He was like a brother to me. And he was the one who stabbed me in the back. I wanted to confront him, but I didn't. For a long time, I just let the anger simmer inside me. Every time I saw him, I thought about all the times he'd sat at my kitchen table, laughed at my jokes, helped me fix the roof. He was a part of my life, and now he was a part of my pain. But then one day, when I was coming home from work, I saw him at the house. Lisa was outside talking to him, again. I didn't know if they were just friends, or if something else was going on, but I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed out of the car and straight toward them. "James!" I shouted, my voice raw. "What the hell are you doing here?" Both of them froze, like they were caught in the middle of something. Lisa looked guilty. But James? He looked indifferent. I had never seen him like that before. The guy I once considered a friend didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "I'm just talking to her, Mike." "Chill out," he said, his voice casual, like we were in the middle of a damn game of poker. But I wasn't playing a game. I was done pretending everything was okay. I lunged at him before I even realized what I was doing, shoving him hard against the fence. The force of the impact sent a jolt through my body. But it felt good. Powerful. I felt in control for the first time since everything had fallen apart. James stumbled back, but he didn't fight me. He just looked at me with cold, empty eyes. You want to fight me, Mike? Go ahead. But it won't fix anything. I punched him. Hard. The sound of my fist connecting with his jaw echoed in my ears, and for that split second, it felt like the world stopped moving. He staggered, holding his face, but I didn't care. I kept swinging. Over and over again. I didn't care about the consequences. I didn't care about anything except the rage burning through me. Finally, Lisa screamed, pulling me away from him. Stop! Stop! She shouted, her hands on my chest, pushing me back. He's not worth it, Mike! It's over! It's done! I stood there, panting, hands shaking, staring at James, who was now nursing his jaw, bleeding from his lip. I didn't care. I couldn't care. Get the hell out of here, James! I spat, barely able to contain the fury boiling in my chest. Get out of my life! He didn't argue. He just nodded, his eyes narrow and filled with something I couldn't quite place. Resentment, maybe? Or pity? As he walked away, I turned to Lisa. I couldn't even look at her without wanting to scream. But all I said was, You're not welcome here anymore. You're not my wife anymore. Her face crumpled. I think she finally realized that the games were over. She tried to apologize, tried to explain herself again, but I just shook my head. I'm done, I said. You ruined everything. She cried. Of course she did. But I didn't feel a thing. The days after that were hell. I didn't want to talk to anyone. Not friends, not family. I couldn't face them. I couldn't look at anyone without feeling like they were judging me. I was the guy who had been betrayed. The guy whose best friend had stabbed him in the back. The guy who had been blind for so long. But Lisa, she didn't leave. She stuck around like a shadow, waiting for me to forgive her, waiting for me to forget. It never happened. And then, the day came when I got the test results back. The results that confirmed everything I feared. Jake wasn't my son. The blood test didn't lie. I wasn't even in the same genetic pool. That was the final straw. I don't know what was worse, the fact that I had been raising someone else's child, or the fact that my entire life had been built on a lie. I didn't care anymore. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't be in the same room. And so I did what I had to do. I packed my things, left the house, and filed for divorce. I took nothing with me, except for my dignity, or what was left of it. Lisa kept calling, kept begging me to come back, but I knew I couldn't. I was done. And in that moment I realized that the person I had once been was gone. There was no going back. That was the day I started over. But I had no idea where to go from here. The first few weeks after I left felt like I was floating through life, just going through the motions. The pain, the anger, it was still there, like an open wound that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't heal. I couldn't even look at a photo of Jake without wanting to break down. My whole life felt like a shattered glass that couldn't be put back together. But life kept moving. The world didn't stop for me. My friends tried to reach out, but I wasn't ready. How could I explain it? How could I tell them that the woman I had built everything with, the woman I had trusted more than anyone, had betrayed me in the worst way possible? The divorce was a blur. Lawyers, paperwork, endless conversations about custody. I kept telling myself it was for the best, that I was doing the right thing. But every time I had to sign a paper or make a decision about Jake, the guilt gnawed at me. He wasn't mine. But he was mine. I had raised him, loved him like my own flesh and blood. And now, I had to let him go. Lisa didn't make it easy. She kept calling, sending texts, showing up at my apartment. I blocked her, deleted her messages, but somehow, she always found a way through. She would show up at my work, or call a friend of mine to pass on a message. She'd say things like, "I'm sorry, Mike," or, "I made a mistake," like her words could somehow undo the damage she'd done. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I was done listening. The hardest part was telling my parents. I hadn't told them the full truth at first. I couldn't. How could I tell them that the son they thought was their grandson wasn't even my child? How could I explain to my mother, who had adored Jake, that he wasn't mine? It was a brutal conversation. My mother cried. Of course she did. She couldn't understand why Lisa would do something like that to me. My father, though, he was different. He was quiet. Too quiet. I could see the disappointment in his eyes, but he didn't say much. It was one of those moments where I realized just how alone I was. My family was there for me, but the weight of everything, my shattered marriage, my broken heart, the knowledge that everything I had built was a lie, it was something no one could fix for me. For the first time, I felt like I was living in a world that wasn't mine. I wasn't sure of who I was anymore. The man I had been, the one who trusted and loved with everything he had, felt like a stranger. The months passed. Slowly, things began to shift. I started to find my footing again. But it wasn't easy. I tried to focus on work, on keeping my mind occupied, but my thoughts always came back to Lisa and the mess she had left behind. I would go to bars with friends, try to drown out the pain, but I was never really there. I was numb. I was still angry, but anger doesn't always work the way you think it will. It doesn't heal. It just burns you from the inside out. I went to therapy, because honestly, I didn't know what else to do. I needed someone to talk to who didn't know me, who didn't have an opinion on the situation, someone who could just listen. It was in one of those sessions that I started to realize something important. Lisa wasn't the only one who had failed me. I had failed myself too. I had ignored the warning signs for years, had buried my own doubts because I wanted to believe in the perfect life we had built. I wanted to believe that love was enough. But it wasn't. And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to rebuild myself after everything had been destroyed. It wasn't just about Lisa's betrayal anymore. It was about everything, the choices I had made, the life I had built, the person I had become. I was angry, but not just at her. I was angry at myself for being blind, for not seeing the cracks earlier. I started to look at my life through a different lens. I realized that I had to let go of the old Mike, the guy who had trusted without question, who had loved without reservation. Because that Mike didn't exist anymore. And maybe that was a good thing. The first real breakthrough came when I started spending more time with people who didn't remind me of my old life, people who didn't know Lisa, who didn't have any connection to the past. I started to make new memories, even if they were small. I went to a concert with some coworkers, took a weekend trip to the coast. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about living. About learning to breathe without the weight of betrayal hanging over my head. But even then, there were moments when I would wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what I had lost. I thought about Jake, about what he meant to me, even though he wasn't really my son. I couldn't stop thinking about how my life would have been different if none of this had happened. I even tried dating again. I went on a few dates, nothing serious. I wasn't ready for anything deep, but I wanted to see if I could feel something again. It was awkward. There were times when I felt like I was pretending, like I was putting on a mask for these women who had no idea what I had gone through. And when I looked into their eyes, I realized I wasn't just hiding my past, I was hiding from myself. Through it all, though, I knew one thing for sure, I had to let go of Lisa. For good. I didn't owe her any more of my time, any more of my thoughts. The divorce was final, and she had moved on, at least, I assumed she had. And that was fine with me. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't living for anyone else anymore. I was living for myself. But that didn't mean the pain went away. It didn't mean I was free from the memories, the anger, or the regret. What it meant was that I was starting to rebuild. Slowly. Piece by piece. And maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to heal. Time passed, but it didn't heal as quickly as I thought it would. There were days when I felt like I was moving forward, making progress, but the shadows of my past kept creeping in. Lisa. Jake. James. It was like a broken record that kept playing in my mind no matter how much I tried to turn it off. I'd thought that the anger would fade, that I'd eventually feel normal again. But it didn't work that way. There were days when I would sit in my new apartment, staring out the window, wondering what my life would have been like if everything had gone differently. What if Lisa had been faithful? What if I hadn't ignored the signs? What if I hadn't been so blind? Those questions haunted me. And the guilt was still there, lurking under the surface, threatening to pull me back into that dark hole I'd been in after everything blew up. I felt like a fool, like I had allowed myself to be so completely consumed by the idea of a perfect life, only to have it all come crashing down. But there were other moments, too, moments of clarity, when I realized that I was no longer the same person I was before all this. The betrayal had changed me, and though I hated it, I knew there was no going back. I could either wallow in my pain forever, or I could face the truth and move forward. I took a deep breath and decided to start focusing on the things that could bring me peace: my career, my health, my own well-being. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I got into a regular workout routine, started eating better, and slowly but surely, my physical appearance began to change. I lost weight, got stronger, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was gaining some control over my life again. But no matter how good I felt physically, emotionally, I was still a wreck. One night, I went out with some friends. A casual get-together. It wasn't anything special, just a few beers and some laughs. But then, out of nowhere, I saw her. Lisa. It was like a punch to the gut. I hadn't seen her in months. I hadn't even expected to. She was sitting at a table across the bar with a new guy. I didn't recognize him, but the way she was laughing, the way she was touching his arm, it was enough to send a jolt of anger through me. I wanted to turn away, to pretend like I didn't care. But I couldn't. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her, from the woman who had once been my whole world and who had shattered everything. She looked different, calmer, more at ease. Maybe even happier. And there was that damn smile again, the one that used to make my heart skip. But this time, it felt wrong. It felt like a betrayal of the person I used to know. I sat at the bar, trying to drink my beer without feeling my stomach churn. My friend Greg noticed me staring, and without asking, he followed my gaze. He didn't say anything, but I could tell by the look in his eyes that he understood. He knew. And yet he didn't have to say it aloud. He just nodded and gave me a minute to process everything. The anger came flooding back. The betrayal, the hurt, the helplessness. It was all still there, buried just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to resurface. But I did my best to keep it in check. I didn't go over to her. I didn't say anything. I didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing how much she still had a hold over me. Instead, I turned away and let the noise of the bar drown out everything else. Later that night, I ended up leaving early, telling Greg I had a long day ahead of me. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing. Lisa had moved on. She had a new guy. She was happy. And that realization hit me harder than anything else. She wasn't the same person I had known. She had built a new life for herself while I was left to pick up the pieces of the life we once shared. But that's when something shifted inside me. The anger, the pain, it started to morph into something different. It wasn't just rage anymore. It was freedom. For the first time, I wasn't defined by the past. I wasn't defined by Lisa's betrayal. I was defined by what I chose to do next. And it wasn't going to be about her. It wasn't going to be about revenge or trying to hurt her like she'd hurt me. I was done. I started thinking more about my future. What did I want? What was I working for? For so long, my identity had been tied to my marriage, to my family. But now, I had to figure out who I was. I had to find a way to live for myself. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally put the past behind me. The weeks that followed were a blur. I focused on myself. I worked out more, threw myself into projects at work, and spent time with the people who truly cared about me. the anger toward Lisa started to fade. Not because I forgave her, but because I realized that holding on to that anger wasn't doing me any good. I still hadn't told Jake the truth. It wasn't because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't ready to shatter what little was left of my heart. But eventually, I had to face him. I had to tell him the truth. It wasn't something I had planned. I wasn't ready for it, but one evening, when we were sitting in the living room, just the two of us, he asked me the question that had been waiting to come for months. "Why did Mom and you stop living together?" I froze. He was only 5, but he was sharp. I had never expected him to ask that question. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how much I had tried to protect him, the truth would eventually come out. And when it did, it would hurt him. But maybe it was better for him to hear it from me than from someone else. "I'll tell you, buddy," I said, my voice shaky, but steady. "But it's going to take some time. You need to understand that it's not your fault." He nodded, looking confused. And for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Lisa or James. I wasn't thinking about the past. I was thinking about how to rebuild. How to be the father Jake needed, even if the world we lived in had changed beyond recognition. Because no matter what had happened with Lisa, no matter how my life had fallen apart, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let the past destroy what I still had. And for the first time, I felt like maybe I could move forward. I could feel the weight of the conversation looming over me for days, even before Jake had asked that simple but piercing question. How could I explain it? How could I tell him that everything he thought was real, everything he believed in, everything he'd grown up knowing, wasn't? But as much as I dreaded it, I knew that silence wouldn't protect him. He was too smart, too intuitive to be left in the dark forever. So, the night he asked me why Lisa and I weren't living together anymore, I knew it was time. I took a deep breath, sitting down on the couch next to him. He was watching me, waiting. His big brown eyes, the same as mine, full of curiosity and confusion. I wanted to protect him from the truth. I wanted to shield him from the ugliness of what had happened. But I knew that wasn't going to work. "Jake," I started, my voice shaking a little. "There's something important I need to tell you." He looked up at me, his expression serious now. He wasn't a baby anymore. He could sense when things weren't right. "It's about your mom and me," I continued. We aren't together anymore because things didn't work out. But it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong, okay?" He nodded, but I could tell he didn't really understand. He was too young, but I could see the little spark of fear in his eyes. Maybe it was the first time he realized that life wasn't as simple as he had thought. That things could fall apart. "I know this is confusing," I said, struggling to put my thoughts into words. "But your mom and I, we grew apart. She made some choices that hurt me, and those choices, well, they led us to where we are now." I paused, the silence between us heavy. The words weren't coming out the way I wanted them to. I didn't know if I was making it worse, but I didn't know how else to say it. Jake frowned. "What kind of choices, Dad?" I looked at my son, his innocent face still so much like mine, and I felt a surge of guilt hit me. How could I explain that the woman he loved, the one who'd raised him, had been with someone else, someone who wasn't me, for months? How could I tell him that the life he thought he had wasn't the one we'd built together? But this wasn't the time for the whole truth. Not yet. I ran a hand through my hair, taking another deep breath. I think it's time for you to know that not everything stays the same. People change, and sometimes, when that happens, things fall apart. But Jake, please know that you're my son. Nothing will change that. I'm always going to be here for you." He seemed to accept that, nodding as he processed it. He wasn't ready for the details, and in a way, either was I. I knew it was going to take time for him to understand everything, but for the moment, I had said enough. The rest of that night was quiet. Jake went to bed earlier than usual, and I sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty space around me. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, what had been taken from me, and what I had lost. I thought about Lisa, about how we used to be. I used to believe in her. I used to believe in us. We had been together for 13 years. We'd shared everything, our dreams, our failures, our future. I remembered the day we met. It felt like a lifetime ago. It was at a mutual friend's party, one of those low-key gatherings where you don't expect much. I was 23, freshly out of college, still trying to figure out life. She was 25, confident, smart, funny. I noticed her the moment she walked in. She had this energy about her that made everything else feel like background noise. We started talking, and it was like everything clicked. The conversation flowed naturally, like we'd known each other forever. She was different from the other women I had dated. She wasn't just pretty, she was real. She had dreams, opinions, ideas that challenged me. We spent the whole night talking, and before I knew it, I was driving her home, feeling like I'd just met someone who could be the one. Our relationship moved quickly after that, like we were both swept up in this whirlwind of possibility. We didn't waste time. Within 6 months, we were living together. A year later, we were married. I thought I had everything I ever wanted: love, stability, a future. The first few years were amazing. We traveled, laughed, celebrated small victories, and commiserated over failures. We got a house, and we even adopted a dog. I thought we were building something real, something unbreakable. When I found out we were pregnant with Jake, it felt like the final piece to our perfect life. But something changed after that. The pressure of parenthood, of responsibility, started to wear on Lisa. It was subtle at first. She'd get home late from work more often, spending less time with me, with Jake. I didn't see it as a red flag at first. Life was busy. I thought we were just going through a phase. But looking back, I know now that it wasn't a phase. She was pulling away, and I was too blind to notice. I didn't see it at the time, but there were signs. Small things, like her being less affectionate, less interested in what was going on in my life. But I ignored it. I was too wrapped up in my own stuff, too focused on work and the responsibilities of being a husband and father. I didn't notice her slipping away. Then, the first birthday party. Jake's first birthday. We had invited friends and family over, and it was supposed to be a celebration of everything we had. But instead, it felt like the beginning of the end. Lisa was drinking, something I hadn't seen her do in a while, and it wasn't the casual drink with dinner kind of thing. She was getting a little too tipsy, laughing too loudly, her words a little too slurred. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on Jake and the presents and the cake, but something about that night felt off. I didn't know then that she had already made her choice. She had already crossed the line. And when I found out months later, when the truth came crashing down, it was like my entire world was built on a foundation of lies. The first DNA test came back. I had always known something was off, but I couldn't bring myself to question it until I had to. I didn't want to believe that Jake wasn't my son, but the test didn't lie. And that was the point of no return. The night I found out the truth felt like a nightmare. It was a cold, rainy evening, and I had just returned from an exhausting day at work. The kind of day where you feel like you've been running on autopilot. Everything was a blur. I tossed my keys on the counter and went straight to the kitchen to grab something to eat. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, I saw the envelope. The DNA test results. Lisa had told me she was getting one. At first, I thought it was a formality, something to shut down any doubts. But as I stood there staring at the envelope, I knew. I knew this was the moment everything would change. I had been avoiding this moment for months. I'd buried the gnawing doubt at the back of my mind because I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to believe that the child I had loved, raised, and cared for wasn't mine. But now, it felt inevitable. I reached for the envelope with trembling hands, the paper cold against my fingers. I pulled the results out and looked at them. The test was conclusive. Jake wasn't my son. The numbers didn't lie. The connection wasn't there. I felt like the floor had just dropped out beneath me. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the couch, my mind scrambling to process what I had just read. It couldn't be true. I had raised him. I had been there for every milestone, every scraped knee, every laugh, every cry. I had loved him as my own, and now it felt like everything I had known about my life was a lie. How could this happen? How could Lisa, my wife, do this to me? I tried to make sense of it, but the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. The realization settled in like a stone in my gut. My entire marriage, my family, was built on deception. I grabbed my phone and called her. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought I could get answers. Maybe I just wanted to hear her voice and make sure I wasn't losing my mind. "Mike, hey," Lisa answered, sounding casual, almost too casual. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at the test results in my hand, the anger rising up in me like a tidal wave. "Mike?" she repeated, this time with concern in her voice. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "I'm just..." She hesitated. "I'm at Sarah's." "Why? What's going on?" "You know exactly what's going on," I said, the words coming out harsher than I meant. "I've got the test results. Jake isn't my son." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a second, I thought she might hang up. Then she sighed. "I can explain," she said, her voice suddenly softer. I clenched my fist, staring at the test results. "Explain? Explain what, Lisa? How you've been lying to me for years? How you've been with someone else behind my back and then had the audacity to let me raise another man's child as my own?" She didn't respond immediately. I could hear her breathing, could hear the faint sound of a car door slamming in the background. "I'm sorry, Mike," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I never meant for it to happen this way. I thought..." "You thought what?" "That I wouldn't find out," I interrupted. My anger was boiling over now. The rage that had been simmering for months came to the surface. "I've been a fool. All this time, I've been a fool. Mike, please," she said, and now there was desperation in her voice. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen. You never wanted to hurt me? You betrayed me, Lisa. You lied to me for years, and you think you can just apologize and make it better?" I couldn't control the rage now. It was pouring out of me, raw and unfiltered. "I've raised him. I've been there for him. And now I find out that none of it matters. He's not mine." I slammed the phone down onto the coffee table, too angry to keep talking. But she wasn't done. I could hear her voice on the other end, pleading, begging for me to listen. "Mike, I'm so sorry. Please, please don't do this. We can fix this, we can." I didn't want to hear it. I couldn't. How could I listen to someone who had shattered my life? How could I sit there and let her apologize when she had already taken everything from me? I hung up on her. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The reality was too much to handle. The man I thought I was, the man she had married, didn't exist anymore. All of it was a lie. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I was a mess. I barely went into work, and when I did, I was distracted, irritable. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to make sense of what had happened, but there was no sense to be made. Lisa tried calling. She left a million voicemails. But I couldn't listen to her voice. I couldn't hear her beg for forgiveness. I couldn't stomach it. The damage had been done. I knew I had to see her again. I knew I couldn't let this drag on without confronting her face to face. So I did. It was late afternoon when I showed up at the house. Lisa was standing in the driveway when I pulled up, looking smaller than I remembered. She didn't look like the woman I had loved. She looked broken. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. She was standing there, arms crossed over her chest, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed like she had been crying. I walked up to her, trying to keep my emotions in check, but it was impossible. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. "What do you want, Lisa?" I said, my voice cold. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. She stopped, swallowing hard. "I didn't want to hurt you, Mike. I didn't know what else to do. You didn't know what else to do? I said, incredulous. You should have been honest with me. You should have told me the truth instead of dragging me into this mess. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could make it go away. Her voice was cracking now, tears threatening to fall. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I swear to God, Mike. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed bitterly. Too late for apologies, Lisa. You've already done enough damage. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care anymore. I didn't care about her tears. I didn't care about her regret. Because none of it changed the fact that I had been deceived, that the foundation of my life had been built on a lie. Jake is not mine, I said, the words coming out like a punch to the gut. And neither are you. She winced, as if I had slapped her. But I didn't care. I had nothing left to give her. I'm done, I said, turning away. You've already taken enough from me. And I walked away. Walking away from Lisa felt like stepping into the void. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there, not with her, not in that house, not with all the lies hanging in the air like smoke. The anger that had burned in me for days hadn't gone away, but now, it was mixed with something else, numbness. A kind of disbelief, like I was living someone else's life. I couldn't believe I had been so blind. How had I missed all the signs? How had I spent years thinking we were building something real, something unbreakable, when the whole time, Lisa was living a lie? It felt like every memory I had of our time together, every anniversary, every birthday, every conversation, was a carefully crafted illusion. I spent the next few days in a daze. I didn't know what to do with myself. Work felt pointless. I couldn't bring myself to focus on anything. I would sit at my desk, but my mind would wander. I kept seeing her face, hearing her voice in my head, her desperate pleas for forgiveness. I had to talk to someone, anyone. I needed to make sense of it. But I didn't want to talk to Lisa. I didn't want to hear any more excuses. The only person I could think of was my best friend, Ryan. He'd been there for me through everything. He was the kind of guy who'd drop anything if you needed him. And, as much as I hated to admit it, I needed someone. I called him that night. Mike? What's up, man? Ryan's voice came through the phone, a little muffled as if he had been busy doing something else. He immediately sounded concerned. You good? No, I'm not good, I replied, the weight of everything I was feeling crashing into me again. I need to talk. Ryan didn't waste any time. Come over. I'll be here. I was at his place in 20 minutes. His apartment wasn't far, and I hadn't been there in a while. It was the usual. Beer cans scattered around, an old couch that smelled faintly of pizza, a TV in the corner playing something I wasn't paying attention to. Ryan was sitting at the kitchen table with a drink in hand, his expression serious, waiting for me to speak. I sat down across from him and took a deep breath. She cheated on me, Ryan, I said, my voice shaking. Lisa cheated on me, and I didn't even know. I've been raising another man's kid. And I didn't even know. Ryan didn't say anything at first. He just stared at me, his eyes narrowed as if he was processing what I'd said. Then he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. I don't know what to say, he finally said. Man, that's rough. I'm sorry. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I felt a lump form in my throat, and I had to force myself to breathe. Everything felt like it was closing in. How could this happen? How could I have been so blind? Ryan leaned forward. You've been with her for, 13 years? Yeah, I replied. 13 years. We've been through everything together. And now I find out she's been lying to me the whole time. I thought we were happy. I thought we were a team. But I was just a sucker. The bitterness in my voice hit me hard, but I couldn't stop. I've been raising Jake like he was my own. And now I find out that he's not even mine. That he's some other guy's kid. Ryan didn't look away from me. He was still watching, but his expression softened. Do you love him? He asked quietly. I froze. The question hit me harder than I expected. Do I love Jake? Of course I loved him. I loved him with everything I had. But I couldn't answer the question right then. Not with the way my whole world felt like it was crumbling apart. I don't know, I said finally. I don't know if I can love him the same way anymore. Ryan sat back, digesting what I had just said. He didn't try to offer some cliched advice or tell me I should forgive her. Ryan wasn't that guy. Instead, he just let the silence stretch between us, as if giving me the space to feel whatever the hell I needed to feel. I can't help you fix this, Mike, Ryan said after a while. I can't fix what you did, and I can't tell you what to do with Jake. But I can tell you this, you're not alone in this. I'm here for you, man. Whatever you need. It felt good to hear that. It felt like a lifeline in the middle of the storm I was drowning in. But as much as Ryan's words comforted me, the truth still hung in the air, suffocating me. After I left Ryan's place that night, I drove around aimlessly, unsure of where I was going. My head was full of images: Jake's first steps, Lisa smiling at me like we were still in love, the empty house. Everything was tainted. It was all a lie. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. The lights in the house were off, and everything was eerily quiet. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I knew I couldn't just ignore what had happened. I had to face it. Lisa wasn't there. She hadn't come home, and I didn't know where she was. I didn't care. But then, as I walked through the kitchen, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a picture frame, sitting on the counter next to the sink. It was a photo of me, Lisa, and Jake, taken just a few months ago at a family picnic. We were all laughing, smiling. A perfect moment frozen in time. Except it wasn't perfect. It was all a lie. I grabbed the frame and slammed it onto the counter, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. It was like I was smashing the life I thought I had, shattering the illusion that had kept me going for so long. I stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the broken glass on the floor. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know what came next. And then, for the first time in days, I heard my phone buzz. It was a message from Lisa. I'm sorry, Mike. I've been selfish. I know I've lost you, but please don't make any decisions you'll regret. We can fix this. I stared at the screen, the words blurring together. She was sorry. But it didn't matter anymore. I had already made my decision. I was done. I didn't respond to Lisa's message. In fact, I didn't respond to anything for the next few days. I went into autopilot mode, doing just enough to get through the motions. Work, eating, sleeping, nothing felt real. The house felt like a tomb, empty and full of echoes. Every corner reminded me of what had been lost. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to face Jake. The kid I thought was mine. The kid I loved, raised, and cared for. I couldn't look at him without the flood of anger and confusion rushing back. But I also couldn't ignore him. He was still here, in this house, and still expecting his father to show up for him. I couldn't just vanish. I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. But then one evening, after work, I came home to find Jake sitting on the couch, flipping through the TV channels. He was 7 now, old enough to have his own personality, his own opinions. He looked up when I walked in, his face lighting up in that way only kids can. "Hey, Dad!" he said, his voice full of enthusiasm, like nothing was wrong. Like everything was still the same. I felt my chest tighten. He was mine, and yet he wasn't. My emotions were all over the place. How could I even look at him without feeling betrayed? And yet, how could I not? I forced a smile, trying to keep it together. "Hey, buddy. How's your day?" "It was good. We learned about dinosaurs at school today. I'm gonna be a paleontologist when I grow up," Jake exclaimed, bouncing on the couch. I nodded, feeling like I was sinking deeper into a pit. "That's great, kiddo. Dinosaurs are cool." He went on about his day, completely oblivious to the storm that had torn apart everything around us. And yet there was a part of me that felt a pull, something primal, something that told me, no matter what, this was still my son. He needed me. And maybe, just maybe, I needed him too. But it wasn't easy. The pain of knowing I wasn't his biological father was a constant weight on my chest. Every time he called me Dad, every time he hugged me, I couldn't help but feel the betrayal. The truth of Lisa's infidelity, and the lies that had been woven around me made everything seem fragile, unreal. I wasn't sure if I could ever look at Jake without seeing the ghost of what had been stolen from me. A few days later, I decided to talk to Lisa. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say, but I couldn't keep living in this state of paralysis. I was tired of being angry, tired of being stuck in a never-ending loop of betrayal and confusion. I texted her. "We need to talk." She replied almost immediately, almost too eagerly. "I know. I'll be home in an hour. Please, Mike, let's fix this." I didn't know if it could be fixed, but I was willing to listen. I had to hear her side. I had to know why. I took a deep breath as I waited, pacing back and forth. When the door opened, I braced myself for whatever was coming. Lisa stepped inside, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Mike," she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No more excuses, Lisa," I said, my voice rough. "I've heard enough of those." She nodded, biting her lip, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mike. You have to believe me, I never meant for this to happen. I thought I could hide it. I thought I could bury it. But I couldn't. I've been living with the guilt, every single day. And I knew the moment you found out, everything would fall apart." "You thought you could bury it?" I repeated, my voice cold. "Lisa, you betrayed me. You didn't just make a mistake, you lied. For years. I know, and I regret it every day." She stepped closer, reaching out as if she could touch my anger and make it disappear. "But Mike, I never wanted to hurt you. I loved you. I still love you. And I'm begging you, don't walk away from this family. Don't walk away from us." I stared at her for a long moment. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I even wanted to. But there was something in her eyes, desperation, regret, maybe even love, that made me pause. I shook my head. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way. I don't know if I can forget what you did." She wiped her eyes, sniffling. "I understand. But please, Mike, don't make a decision out of anger. You're not the only one who's been hurt. I've been living in this mess for years. Please, let's try to fix it. We can work through this." It was a dangerous thing she was asking. To rebuild something that had already been torn apart. To try and glue back together a shattered picture that would never be the same again. But then I thought of Jake. I thought of how much he needed me, how much he needed someone. I thought of what it would mean to walk away from him, to leave him to navigate this world without a father. I wasn't sure if I could live with that. "I can't promise anything," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know if I can forgive you. But I won't just abandon him." Lisa nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I don't care what it takes, Mike. I'll do anything. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." I wasn't sure if that was possible. But I could see she was willing to fight for this family. And for the first time in a long time, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could fight too. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. There was no magic fix, no sudden spark of forgiveness. Every day was a struggle. Lisa and I had long, painful conversations. Sometimes we argued, sometimes we cried together. But there was one thing that remained constant: Jake. He was the center of it all. The reason I kept trying. The reason I didn't just give up. I started spending more time with him. Taking him to soccer practice, helping him with homework, reading bedtime stories. Slowly, I began to rebuild the bond between us. It was hard, though. Every time I saw him, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. But I also couldn't ignore the fact that he needed me. Lisa tried, too. She showed up for therapy, confessed her mistakes, admitted how far she'd fallen. But I wasn't sure if it would ever be enough. Every time I looked at her, I saw the person who had betrayed me, the person who had torn apart my world. The cracks in our marriage were visible. But we were both trying to patch them, piece by piece. I don't know if we would ever be the same again, but I was willing to try. For Jake. For the family we once were. But as the days passed, I started to realize something. I was changing. The man I used to be, the man who would have fought tooth and nail to keep his family together, was gone. Maybe I was starting to accept that there was no going back. Maybe this was the beginning of something else entirely. The weeks after Lisa and I started therapy were a blur. On the outside, things seemed to settle into a routine: work, dinner with Jake, some forced conversations between Lisa and me. But underneath, the foundation of our relationship was cracked, splintered in ways that couldn't easily be fixed. Every time I saw Lisa's face, I was reminded of her betrayal, and every time I looked at Jake, I saw both my love for him and the ever-present doubt that weighed on my heart. I had told myself I was staying for Jake, staying for the family we once had, but if I was being honest with myself, I wasn't sure anymore. The love I thought I had for Lisa had eroded so deeply that sometimes I couldn't even remember what it felt like. I wanted to forgive her, I really did. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of her with another man. Every time I held Jake, I felt the sting of knowing I wasn't his real father. It was like I was living in a house of glass. One wrong move, and everything would come crashing down. I was a man on the edge, desperately clinging to the pieces of a life that was no longer mine. It was around this time that I started hearing from old friends. Ryan, of course, had been there through it all. But the others, the ones I'd lost touch with over the years, began reaching out. I suppose it was the shock of the situation. Lisa's affair had become a kind of local legend. People who had once been close to us were suddenly interested in my life again, whether they had heard the details or were simply trying to offer their condolences. It was strange, to be honest. Some of them came with sympathy, others with pity. One day, I got a message from Sarah, a woman I'd known from college. She was one of those people who had always been in the background of my life, someone who had known Lisa and me before everything started falling apart. I hadn't heard from her in years, but now, she was reaching out. Her message was simple. "Mike, I know it's been a while, but I've heard what happened. I just wanted to check in on you. You doing okay?" It felt odd. A little intrusive, but also comforting in its own way. I decided to reply. "I'm hanging in there. I'm trying to keep it together for Jake." The conversation that followed was casual at first. Sarah asked about Jake, how he was doing, what I was up to. I didn't mention Lisa's infidelity. I wasn't ready to talk about it with anyone other than Ryan. But eventually, the conversation took a turn. Sarah, who had always been kind and understanding, asked me if I needed someone to talk to. And that question, that simple offer of a listening ear, made me pause. I had never been one to share my emotions, not in the way I needed to. I had always kept my feelings buried deep, thinking that if I just kept moving forward, everything would work itself out. But it wasn't working out. And I realized, for the first time in a long time, I needed something else. Someone else. I agreed to meet her for coffee. It was a decision that, at the time, felt small, just two old friends catching up. But deep down, I knew I was treading dangerous ground. I hadn't thought about anything like that since Lisa and I had started our life together. But here I was, preparing to meet Sarah. The woman who had always been there, but never in the way I had ever considered before. When I walked into the cafe, I saw her sitting at a table near the window, looking as calm and collected as always. She looked the same, just a little older, a little more mature. She smiled when she saw me, and that smile, so warm, so familiar, felt like a punch in the gut. "Mike!" she greeted me, standing up. "It's so good to see you." I sat down across from her, trying to shake off the unease I was feeling. Sarah wasn't the reason my life had fallen apart, but her presence stirred something inside of me. Something I had buried deep. We talked about everything and nothing. Jake's school, Sarah's job, the friends we used to hang out with. But every now and then, I would catch her looking at me differently, like she was studying me. There was something more in her gaze, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Eventually, the conversation turned to Lisa. I hadn't expected it to, but somehow it did. "How are you handling everything?" Sarah asked carefully, as if testing the waters. "I know it's been tough with Lisa." I looked at her, surprised by the question. "It's been hell," I said, my voice tight. "I'm trying to figure out if there's even anything left to salvage. I don't know if I can forgive her. I don't know if I can ever look at her the same way again." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "I can't even imagine how hard it must be for you. Betrayal is a terrible thing. But Mike, you don't deserve to be stuck in this pain forever." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. "I don't know what I deserve anymore," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "Maybe you deserve something better," she said softly. Her eyes lingered on mine for a moment, almost too long. "Maybe you deserve to be happy again." The way she said it, so gently, with such quiet conviction, hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't looking for happiness. I was just trying to survive. But her words, her presence, made something stir inside me. Something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. We finished our coffee and said our goodbyes. But as I walked out of the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just crossed a line. A line I wasn't sure I should have crossed. The confusion that had settled in my chest since the day I found out about Lisa's affair was now joined by something else: guilt. The guilt was overwhelming. How could I feel this way? How could I even entertain the thought of something more with Sarah when my entire life was falling apart because of Lisa's betrayal? It wasn't right. It wasn't fair to anyone. But as I drove home that evening, I realized something else. I couldn't ignore the fact that I was changing. I was no longer the man who was just going to take it, keep his head down, and pretend everything was fine. Maybe it was time to stop living in the shadow of someone else's mistakes. Maybe it was time for me to start thinking about myself, for once. When I walked through the door that night, Lisa was waiting for me, her face pale and tired. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off before she could say anything. "I need some time, Lisa," I said, my voice raw. "I need to figure things out. I can't keep living like this." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, but I couldn't comfort her anymore. I wasn't even sure if I could comfort myself. And as I sat down on the couch, staring at the mess my life had become, I realized that I was at a crossroads. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I could ever rebuild what had been destroyed. But one thing was certain: the life I had known was over. The only question left was, what came next? The days that followed were an emotional blur. I was stuck in a cycle, waking up, going to work, coming home, trying to fake normalcy around Jake and Lisa, and then laying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was really the life I wanted. If this was all there was. Lisa and I barely spoke. The weight of our conversation about needing time hung over us, unspoken but ever present. She tried, of course. She tried so hard to talk, to explain, to apologize. But I had nothing left to give. No words, no energy, no care. Everything about her, everything about us, felt like a lie now. It wasn't just her betrayal that haunted me anymore. It was my own reflection in the mirror. I wasn't the man I thought I was. I wasn't the man I had been. How had I let this happen? How had I let my life fall apart without ever seeing it coming? Jake, as always, was the bright spot in the middle of all this chaos. He needed me. He wanted me. And maybe that was the only reason I didn't just walk out the door and never look back. Every time I felt like I was going to lose it, I looked at him and reminded myself why I was still here. But even with Jake, something was off. The bond we had felt stronger than ever, but there was a part of me that now questioned everything. How could I love this child, knowing I wasn't his real father? How could I give him all the love he deserved when I was drowning in a sea of lies? I hated the way I felt. I hated feeling like I didn't belong in my own life. One night, a week after meeting Sarah, I couldn't sleep. I had spent the entire day fighting with myself, my mind pulling me in two directions. One part of me wanted to move on, to escape, to leave everything behind and start fresh. The other part wanted to stay, to try and patch things together with Lisa, for Jake's sake. I grabbed my phone, and there it was again, the message from Sarah. "Mike, just wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" I hesitated. I had told myself I wouldn't lean on anyone. Not after everything. But that message, her concern, felt like a lifeline. I didn't have anyone else to talk to, and honestly, I needed someone who wasn't involved in my wrecked marriage. I needed someone who could see me as I was, not as the husband or father, but as Mike, just me. "I'm not okay, Sarah." I typed back, my fingers trembling. "I'm drowning in everything. I don't even know who I am anymore." I stared at the message before I sent it. The guilt was suffocating. But something inside me felt like I needed to get it out. I needed someone to hear me. Sarah was the first person who had offered me an escape, even if it was just in the form of a conversation. Her reply was quick. "Mike, I don't expect you to have everything figured out right now. But you don't have to go through this alone. If you need to talk, I'm here." I took a deep breath and then typed the words that would change everything. "Can we meet again? I need someone to talk to. Someone who doesn't judge." The message lingered on the screen for a moment, and then her response came through. "Of course. Let's meet tomorrow. Same place?" I set my phone down and tried to calm my racing heart. I knew what I was doing. I knew it wasn't right. But I couldn't help myself. I needed something, anything, that could pull me out of this void I was living in. The next day, I met Sarah at the same cafe. When she saw me walk in, her face lit up with that same warm smile. But this time, there was something different in the air between us. It wasn't just a casual coffee between friends anymore. I could feel the tension, the unspoken understanding that something had shifted. We sat down, ordered our drinks, and I immediately launched into everything that had been consuming me. "I don't know what to do anymore, Sarah," I said, my voice low. "Every day, it feels like I'm losing a part of myself. I'm just stuck in this life I didn't ask for, stuck with a family that doesn't feel like mine. It's like I'm watching my whole world burn down, and I don't know how to stop it." She listened intently, her eyes never leaving mine. She didn't interrupt or try to offer solutions. She just let me talk, letting the words spill out like a dam breaking. "I'm angry. I'm angry at Lisa. I'm angry at myself. But most of all, I'm angry that I can't fix any of this. That I've spent all these years being lied to, being played for a fool. And now, I don't even know who I am anymore." Sarah's expression softened. She reached across the table and gently placed her hand on mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first genuine comfort I'd felt in weeks. "You're still you, Mike. Even if it doesn't feel like it right now. You're still the man I remember. You're still the person who would do anything for his son." Her words hit me like a wave. The sincerity in her voice, the way she saw me, really saw me, made something inside me crack wide open. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to look at me that way. "I'm so sorry for what you're going through," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you don't have to go through it alone. I'm here for you. And I'm not just talking about right now. I mean, I'm here for the long haul. Whenever you're ready." The weight of what she was offering sank in. It wasn't just a friendly gesture. She was offering me something deeper, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. But at that moment, it felt like a lifeline, like a breath of fresh air after being suffocated for so long. I pulled my hand back, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment felt. My chest tightened. "I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can move on from everything that's happened." "I'm not asking you to move on," she said gently. "I'm asking you to let someone in. Someone who can help you see that you don't have to do this by yourself." Her words echoed in my mind as I left the cafe that afternoon. The weight of my marriage, my life, my mistakes, all pressed down on me. I wasn't sure what I was doing anymore. I wasn't sure if I was making things worse or if I was just starting to make things right. But I knew one thing: I was at a breaking point. And no matter what happened next, I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. Bye.